October 26th, 2016. The outskirts of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Out here, the night feels almost alive. The silence isn't just quiet, it presses in, heavy, forcing you to listen to every rustle in the tall grass and every creak of those old, twisted trees. Wayne Rohrer, a close friend of the Blauvelt family, wasn't driving down that broken dirt road toward an abandoned farmhouse out of curiosity. He was there for a reason. Over the past few days, he'd heard from several of John Blauvelt's relatives about the family's old farm, a place John used to visit alone, a place that others were quietly told to stay away from. Katie Blauvelt had been missing for 3 days now. The official search hadn't yet reached private property, and Wayne knew waiting could mean losing precious time. He decided to check the farm himself. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching on peeling paint and empty window frames. The air inside was thick, damp wood, mildew, and something faintly sour, something that set his nerves on edge. After checking the first floor and finding nothing unusual, his eyes fell on the basement door. He remembered hearing talk about that basement, how people avoided it. As he stepped down the creaking stairs, the temperature dropped sharply. The cold air felt like it was sinking into his bones. His flashlight swept across piles of debris, broken tools, and rusted metal, until it stopped on a large concrete tank. Industrial-looking. Its heavy lid had been pushed aside a few inches. Something about that didn't sit right. It had been moved. Recently. When the light hit the opening, the truth came into view. Inside the tank, partially covered with dirt and dry branches, was a body. The shape, the hair, the clothes, it was unmistakable. It was Katie. Wayne ran out of the basement and called emergency services immediately. Within 20 minutes, the property was sealed off. Under the harsh glow of portable floodlights, investigators began their work. It didn't take long for them to realize this wasn't a random hiding spot. The place was familiar to the person who did this. Carefully chosen. The question, why here, pointed investigators straight toward one name, John Blauvelt. To understand what happened at that lonely, abandoned farm, detectives needed to piece together every moment of Katie's final day. October 23rd, 2016. A Sunday like any other. That morning, Katie was at work in Greenville, at the PetSmart on Woodruff Road. Her co-workers later described her as calm, focused, polite. She helped customers, handled her usual tasks, and didn't seem troubled or distracted. At 2:15 p.m., she clocked out for the day using the store's digital terminal, said goodbye to her co-workers, and left through the employee exit. She had plans to meet friends that evening, but she never arrived. Just a few hours later, her phone went silent. The last trace of Katie's living presence came from her phone's cloud storage. At 4:17 p.m., the system logged brief activity. While sitting in the driver's seat of her car, Katie took a selfie. In the picture, there were no signs of distress, no struggle, no one else nearby. Just a casual snapshot of a young woman before a drive. But after that moment, all communication stopped. When repeated calls from her worried family went unanswered, Katie's parents contacted law enforcement. Given the circumstances, the search began immediately. Teams started tracking every route she might have taken that day. Katie's car was found the following day, abandoned in a parking lot off Whitehorse Road. The vehicle was locked, and inside, there were no keys, no wallet, and no phone. Detectives quickly reviewed footage from nearby security cameras. The grainy video captured the moment the car was parked and left behind, but the driver's face was impossible to identify due to poor resolution and camera angle. The car looked eerily still, almost staged, and the location itself was far from any route Katie normally took. Investigators immediately considered the possibility that someone had tried to stage her disappearance or make it look like an abduction. After Katie Blauvelt's body was recovered from the concrete tank, the investigation moved to the coroner's office. The identity of the victim was officially confirmed. Katie was 22 years old. She'd grown up in the small town of Mountville and had a delicate build, standing about 5'1". Those physical details were carefully noted as detectives began reconstructing the possible scenario of the attack. Katie's background included an important detail. In 2015, she had joined the U.S. Army, but was discharged just weeks later due to a congenital spinal condition. After leaving the service, she returned to civilian life, took a job at a pet store, and tried to build a stable future, one that, as investigators later learned, was quietly falling apart inside her marriage. The autopsy results were clear. The cause of death was multiple, sharp force injuries. But the most crucial evidence wasn't the wounds themselves. It was the signs of resistance. Beneath Katie's fingernails, investigators found biological traces that pointed to a violent struggle. These samples were collected for DNA testing. Meanwhile, detectives revisited the basement of the old farmhouse. The concrete tank turned out to be a separate industrial container not connected to the house's foundation. Placing a body inside, it required knowledge of the basement's layout and considerable strength. Investigators also determined that the body had been placed through a narrow window near ground level, suggesting the act was planned in advance. During interviews with relatives, it became clear that the old farm had been in the Blauvelt family for decades, and John knew every inch of it, including all its technical quirks. The choice of that location wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the deliberate act of someone confident that he was using a place he considered his own territory. John Blauvelt became the primary focus of investigators within hours of Katie's body being found. At the time, he was 28 years old, and on the surface, his reputation in the community seemed flawless. But the very first interview with him raised red flags for the experienced detectives. When officers officially informed him about the discovery on his family's property, John didn't shed a single tear. Sitting in the interview room, he maintained an unsettling emotional distance, calm, detached, almost rehearsed. He didn't ask how she was found, whether she had suffered, or if there were any leads. Instead, he focused on his current army duties and his weekend plans. During that interview, detectives noticed one small visual detail that would later become crucial to identifying him on security footage. A clear tattoo of a pirate on his forearm, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeve of his uniform shirt. It felt out of place on a man who projected the image of a disciplined recruiter, but it reflected who he truly was inside. Someone who lived by his own harsh rules. Blauvelt's demeanor gave the impression that Katie wasn't a loved one to him, but rather an obstacle that had finally been removed from his path. His detachment wasn't shock. It was the cold calculation of a manipulative personality who had already played this scene in his mind many times before. A week later came a second interview, which cemented detective suspicions. John admitted that he'd gone to the funeral home to identify Katie's body, but what he said next shocked even the officers. He showed up not alone, but with his new girlfriend, 17-year-old Hannah Thompson. Arriving at the identification of his late wife alongside a teenage companion was a clear indicator to the investigators of a complete lack of empathy or moral restraint. From that point on, surveillance was placed around John's house 24/7, and analysts began digging into his background. Beneath the polished exterior of a U.S. Army recruiter, they uncovered a darker side, one riddled with controlled substances, threats, and unchecked aggression. For the people of Simpsonville, John Blauvelt had long been seen as the model soldier, a man trusted by parents, respected by the community, and viewed as someone with discipline and purpose. But behind that carefully crafted image, another truth was quietly taking shape. According to those who knew Katie, the changes in John's behavior didn't happen overnight. Over time, especially after Katie's discharge from the Army, unfamiliar faces began showing up at their home. Most of them were high schoolers John claimed to be mentoring. But those so-called mentoring sessions gradually turned into late-night parties. Katie's friend, Ellie Somerville, would later describe the atmosphere as pure chaos, alcohol, controlled substances, and a complete lack of boundaries. John wasn't just tolerating it, he was the one making it happen. Among the regular guests was 17-year-old Hannah Thompson, who eventually fell completely under his influence. Katie started to realize that her home was no longer a safe place. The full weight of what was happening around her finally hit, and she decided to leave. But for John, her decision wasn't seen as a personal choice. He took it as a threat to his carefully crafted double life. In his mind, Katie had become someone who knew too much. By early 2016, the situation around John Blauvelt was spinning out of control. In February, Hannah Thompson's father went to the police, claiming that his underage daughter was being kept at the home of an adult man. When officers arrived, they found the girl inside John's house and noted clear signs of substance use. That incident triggered a chain of events that stretched on for weeks. Around the same time, Katie filed a report for domestic aggression, stating that John had previously threatened her with a weapon. Her statement became part of a separate investigation. Following an internal review, the U.S. Army made the decision to discharge John Blauvelt. Losing his career, his income, and his reputation hit him hard. Cut off from his social circle, he became fixated on blaming Katie for everything that had gone wrong in his life. He called her the reason for his downfall. By the fall of 2016, John's anger had shifted from words to actions. Investigators would later determine that around this time, he began tracking Katie's movements and planning how to make her disappear for good. The investigation into the death of Katie Blauvelt made one thing absolutely clear. This was not a random act of aggression or a moment of uncontrolled rage. It was a cold, calculated operation carried out with precision. Cybercrime detectives conducted a deep forensic audit of John Blauvelt's digital activity and discovered what could only be described as a detailed preparation journal. For several weeks leading up to October 23rd, John had been methodically researching disturbing topics online. Searches like how to properly sharpen combat knives, how long does a body take to decompose in a sealed concrete space, and how police surveillance works in South Carolina. These searches became undeniable evidence that his actions were premeditated long before the attack took place. Beyond the digital trail, investigators uncovered another critical layer: the financial motive. John knew that Katie had a life insurance policy worth $100,000. Unemployed and struggling with debt, he saw that payout as his chance at a comfortable life after his wife's disappearance. So confident was he in his plan that he even approached people from his questionable social circle, offering them a cut of the insurance money in exchange for help carrying out the act. One witness would later testify that John had seriously discussed crossing state lines to commit the crime elsewhere, hoping to throw off investigators and erase any traceable evidence. His arrogance was fueled by a distorted sense of superiority. John often bragged about his time in the army, referring to himself as a born fighter. He would describe in disturbing detail the vulnerable points on the human body that could cause instant, fatal injury. He referred to Katie as a problem that needed to be cut out for the greater good. By the time that fateful Sunday arrived, detectives had pieced together the full picture: a clear motive of revenge, a financial incentive, and a meticulously crafted plan. John Blauvelt hadn't just committed a crime. He had engineered a methodical, deliberate act against the very person he once vowed to protect. And every single one of his online searches had been another step toward that cold, concrete basement on the abandoned farm. On November 18th, 2016, the quiet outskirts of Simpsonville were shattered by the wail of police sirens. Special units had finally obtained an official warrant for the arrest of John Blauvelt, charged with first-degree murder. But when officers forced open the front door of his home, they found nothing but silence and the traces of a hasty escape. John, a trained Army recruiter with sharp instincts, hadn't waited for the investigation to close in. He could sense the noose tightening, and on November 14th, just after another long and tense round of questioning, he vanished. Along with him disappeared 17-year-old Hannah Thompson. Her parents immediately reported her missing that same day, fearing the worst. Blauvelt's escape looked less like a panic-driven flight and more like a calculated tactical operation, the kind you'd expect from someone with military training. The fugitives avoided every digital footprint. No bank cards, no GPS, no cell phones, nothing that could betray their location through cell towers or transaction logs. They traveled only along backcountry roads, steering clear of major highways lined with traffic cameras and plate readers. That red sedan became both their fortress and their only home. To stay unnoticed, they parked overnight at truck stops or in makeshift camps, places where no one asks questions and everyone minds their own business. Their remarkable mobility was confirmed on November 15th, when surveillance footage from a gas station in Las Cruces, New Mexico, captured their red car, nearly 1,300 miles from South Carolina. John was heading west, moving fast and with chilling confidence. While state authorities were still processing the paperwork for an interstate warrant, Blauvelt was already building a new life under a false identity somewhere across the country. He'd left behind everything: a wife whose life he had taken, the devastated family of the young girl who vanished with him, and an investigation that would drag on for 6 long years, haunted by his professional-level ability to disappear without a trace. On December 12, 2016, Hannah Thompson unexpectedly made contact from the state of Oregon. She told authorities that John Blauvelt had left her. Shortly afterward, she voluntarily returned to South Carolina, where she was questioned by federal agents. During interrogation, Hannah insisted that she had no prior knowledge of the crime and no information about John's whereabouts. Lacking evidence of intent or direct involvement, investigators classified her as a witness rather than a suspect. The case against John Blauvelt soon went cold. For 6 long years, he managed to stay out of reach, slipping through every lead and surviving as a ghost, even as public attention grew and tips continued to come in. In 2022, the investigation was reassigned to a specialized unit of the U.S. Marshals Service. Their mission was to re-examine John's old connections, track possible intermediaries, and reanalyze every thread that had once led nowhere. Special attention was once again given to Hannah Thompson, and under renewed scrutiny, her contacts were closely reviewed. Confronted with new evidence, Hannah agreed to cooperate and directed investigators toward the city of Medford, Oregon. There, marshals set up covert surveillance on a man living under an alias. His appearance had changed, but his height, build, and mannerisms matched the long-missing Blauvelt. What finally confirmed his identity was a single visual detail documented years earlier in the case files. In July 2022, the suspect was seen outside his home, shirtless. On his forearm, the same distinctive pirate tattoo, once photographed by South Carolina police, was clearly visible. Combined with other evidence, that mark was enough to authorize an arrest operation. Court proceedings later helped reconstruct the full sequence of events. On October 23, 2016, John Blauvelt began following Katie right after her shift ended at PetSmart. Driving a second car, he trailed her quietly, waiting for the moment she'd be alone. At 4:17 p.m., Katie took a selfie, the same photo that would later become her final digital trace. Minutes later, John confronted her, weapon in hand, and forced control of her vehicle. Under threat, he directed her toward the abandoned family farm. In the basement of the farmhouse, a struggle took place, confirmed later by DNA found beneath Katie's fingernails. After the attack, her body was placed inside a concrete tank that had been chosen in advance. To stage her disappearance, John later abandoned Katie's car in another parking lot and destroyed her phone. The entire sequence took just over 2 hours. Investigators concluded it wasn't a moment of uncontrolled rage, but a cold, methodical chain of actions. September 20th, 2024. The courtroom in Greenville was filled to capacity. Sitting at the defendant's table was John Blauvelt, a man whose name, after years of investigation, had become synonymous in South Carolina with betrayal and cruelty. It didn't take long for the jury to reach its decision. The evidence was overwhelming. Direct DNA matches, his sudden disappearance, 6 years on the run, and the digital trail of his meticulous planning. The verdict hit the room like a gavel's crack. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and unlawful possession of a firearm. John listened to the judgment with the same frozen calm that had stunned detectives 8 years earlier. When the judge delivered the final sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, John didn't flinch. The concrete walls of a prison would now be his last home. Justice had finally caught up with him after 2,000 days on the run, proving that no amount of military training or disguise could conceal the trail of blood he left behind. But the story didn't end there. On August 21st, 2025, it was Hannah Thompson's turn to stand before the court. Her role in the case was determined to be secondary. A young woman manipulated and controlled by a dangerous man. The court sentenced her to 3 years of probation. The story of Katie Blauvelt, the young woman found in a concrete chamber beneath an abandoned farm, was finally brought to a close. The scales of justice had balanced at last, the criminal behind bars and his accomplice forced to face the consequences of her choices. Outside the courthouse, Katie's mother, Patricia, told reporters that her daughter could finally rest in peace. What remained was a painful reminder of the price of a human life and of the importance of never giving up on the truth, even when hope seems lost. The case was closed, but the scars John Blauvelt left on his family and his community would take far longer to heal.